Hey, greetings from Italy as well. Okay, greetings from India here. We're all staying home now. All right, let's keep moving forward. So, you might have already seen in the previous ProtoPie workshops uh, this interaction piece table. This table essentially is talking about the basic conceptual model that ProtoPie works on, which is basically you have an object, you combine it with a trigger, and you can get a response. ProtoPie gives you a bunch of different triggers to choose from. So you can do things like tap an object or pull an object, and based on that, you can get a response out of that object as well. There's also this thing called conditions, which basically lets you choose which response to get based on which condition is being fulfilled. We'll talk about all of that later, but for now, just to recap, you might have already worked with the tap, the long press, the reset, the stop, and the rotate responses and triggers. In today's workshop, we're going to talk about more than just that. We're going to talk about the pull, the fling, the drag, and some of these things are applicable to different triggers as well. So when I'm going to tell you about drag, it's kind of applicable to pinch as well. And since you already know about tap, you will also be able to know what double tap does. And I will also touch upon what touch down and touch up does. In addition, we'll be also talking about a lot of different responses such as move, scale, opacity, reorder, and some of these things, like I said, I might not touch upon each of these individually, but things like, let's say if I talk about opacity or color, right? That same learning is going to be applicable to border and shadow and other responses like that as well. But please feel free to ask any questions regarding any of the responses as we go forward. Now, like I said before, we're going to be doing 3 main demos today as part of our ProtoPie project. The first one is going to be about building a slightly more complex page transition. This is what it will look like. So you notice how the box expanded and then you went on to a different page. ProtoPie already offers a bunch of different page transitions out of the box, but this learning will let you build even more complex transitions. The next thing we're going to talk about in the next demo is going to be the scrolling and paging. How are they different? How do you define how to scroll? What is a container? I'll be talking about all of those things. And finally, for our third demo, we will be building this sliding menu, which you can drag out from the corner of a page and put back in as well. And I'll talk to you about the different ways you can do this and which one will probably suit your prototype depending on which use case you're in. Anyways, moving forward, let's just get the source file. I think Rebecca will share that in the chat. And yeah, let's just start building this together. And just to again recap, when Rebecca shares the link, you'll see a page like this. And what you want to do is press the download button to get the .py file to get this working. Yep. And just as a reminder, if you haven't attended any of the previous workshops, I think ProtoPie has already uploaded them onto their YouTube channel. So please feel free to go ahead and check that out as well. I'm just going to give you guys a minute to download the file. And meanwhile, I'll also open up my ProtoPie. And I think once you guys have the file and once you have ProtoPie open, this is probably what you'll have on screen as well. So notice that Rebecca has shared that in the chat. Hoping everyone is also doing the same. So Marikar Finn is saying, yes, just downloading it. Yes, you should. Yes, let's do it. All right, probably just a minute. We'll just give it a minute. And meanwhile, I'll also talk about, or actually, I'll just wait before I talk about that. All right. I think, I hope most of you guys have the file already downloaded and ProtoPie is opened up. I hope it's all looking like this. In fact, it might not all look like this. It might probably look something like this. And I'll talk to you about how I set up my workspace to probably work better as well. Now, you might know already that ProtoPie offers a preview window that lets you see in real time what's happening. So I like to just keep that on the screen at all times. So I'm just gonna move my window a little bit so that I can keep seeing the actual device preview. I'm gonna do this, just set up the workspace like so. There you go. You don't have to do this, but this is just a workspace that will kind of help you always see what you're making and always test it out immediately. Now, the other thing is you already know about the interaction pane, the properties here, and the layers panel here. I'm going to tell you about one more thing, which is the scenes panel. And okay, we'll get to that. Or in fact, let's just start off with that. So scenes panel basically lets you see the different scenes that we'll be working with today. I'm just going to pin it here. You don't have to do this, but just so that we know which page we are on and which page we want to transition to, since we will be talking about page transitions. Now, for our first demo, or before we actually do that, you might already remember from the beginner workshop how you made a long press and a tap. And if you don't remember that, please go ahead and check out the tutorial on YouTube. And what they did in the previous workshop was you could do a long press and make this infinitely rotating animation, and then you can tap to stop it, which is great. But now what we want to do is we want to tap this guy here, and we want the box to expand, and we want to transition from the home page to the onboarding page. So how do we do that? Well, we know for sure that we want to select this icon here. So let's just select it. I'm just going to double tap here and select this big box on the background. I can see that it's called IoTBG. And all I want to do is I will select a trigger. Now let's see what happens. When I select a trigger, I know that I want to use something that allows me to tap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go by the name and I'm going to go with tap. Great. So now this is the trigger, but what response do I want in turn? What happens when I actually press tap? Well, for starters, I know for sure that I want the box to scale. Well, so we add a response here by pressing the plus button and we choose this. Oh, I'm seeing Janik, if please forgive me for the mispronunciation, but he's saying, I don't see your screen. Is that a problem with everyone? Do I need to fix that? Please let me know. Is my screen visible to everyone? Leah, can you help me here? Oh, okay, I'm seeing Julia, Ioannis. All right, people can see the screen. So I'm not sure, Yannick, why I don't see your, why you can't see my screen, but if there's a setting at your end that you want to fix, I'll let you fix that. Anyways, to continue, yes, you press the plus button to see a response. What responses can I get as for a tap trigger? Well, here you go. I tapped on the plus button and I see the different responses. So like I said, for the first thing that I noticed, I really want the box to scale. So I'm going to choose a scale response because that's just going by the name. I'm just going to assume it does that thing. Now scale, when you actually get to it, it shows you all these different properties. So you see scale by size, scale by factor, and then you see what size to scale to. And then if you click that, you'll even see what size to scale by. I'll talk about each of these, but for the starters, let's just keep moving and show you what this actually even does. Well, I know that this box, if I click on it, I'll get to see the size, which is the box is actually 60 by 60 in width and height. So we wanted to kind of cover the entire screen. Now I know we're using an iPhone 11 Pro as the artboard size, which is this guy here. And I know that the size for that is 375 by 812. So we're going to use those numbers. We're going to use that. We're going to expand our box to that size. So let's just do that. Let's say 375 and then 812 because that's what the size of the iPhone 11 Pro artboard is. So let's just press enter here and let's just see what happens. We've so far made a tap and we've gotten a response in return. Let's see what happens. So I tap it and it's scaling. Well, it is scaling, but it's scaling like not like how we want it. We want to make sure it scales and moves to the center of the page. So that's where the second clue is. We want to move it to the center of the page. So how do we do that? We press the plus button again and we add another response called the move. So we want the box to move to a position where the scaling will kind of cover the entire artboard. So where do we move it? How do we know where to move it? Well, let's just test it out. So if I were to move it, if this box is scaling like it's going towards the left, towards the right, and towards the bottom, so we want to move this to the top corner, top left corner, so that it can scale towards the right and towards the bottom and still cover the full screen. So how do we know what value that is? Well, from the x and y coordinates, we can see right now the box is placed at 29 and 446 x and y, right? But we want to move it all the way here to make it actually happen. And you can notice that this position is actually 0 comma 0. So that's what we want to do. I'm just going to press undo because I don't want to move the box actual position there, but we just want to move it as a transition. So we will move it to 0 comma 0. And let's see what that does. So now it's covering the full screen. It's almost like magic. But I'll also show you individually what these two do, right? So let me go back to the original state by pressing the reset button here. And let's say if I want to just see what move does individually, I'm going to turn this off by pressing this toggle button here. And this is a very good way to continuously test if your interactions are doing the right thing. So you can test just one at a time as well. So I'm just going to turn off scaling for 1 second here. It's off right now. So all that tap will do is it will move it. And you know it's off because this text and this color will become disabled. So let's see what happens now. Now you'll notice when I tap, it moves to the top left corner. So what we are doing is we're basically making it move and scale at the same time. And that is giving the effect of the box covering the full screen. Now what's not happening is, or what you don't want is, you don't want these two icons to stay here. You want these to kind of go away when the box expands, because how else does an app open? When you tap an app to open, you don't see anything else. So how do we do that? Well, okay, I think before I go there, let me talk about scaling a little bit more, because I told you I'll talk about all of these different things. So now we changed the scale by size and we chose a size. We're saying scale to 375 by 812 from whatever size it was originally. Now, if I were to choose scale by, that would mean if I click on the box here and if I see the original size, which is 60 by 60, which means 60 pixels in width and 60 pixels in height, if I were to scale by a value, it would add that to its existing size. So if it's already 60 and if I write 100, if I write 100 here, then it's going to make it 160 by 160. That's all it's doing. So here we don't want to do that. We want to keep it 375. And we want to make the height 812. Okay. Now what does factor do? Factor uses a percentage-based scaling system. So sometimes you don't want to look at the exact dimensions. You just know that you want to double the size or triple the size or reduce the size by 50%. So that's when this comes in handy. If you say scale to 100%, it will go to its actual original value, which that's the 100% value. But if I want to make it the double size, I will just choose 200%. And now if I press it, it's just becoming twice its original size. So it's becoming 60 times 2. So it's becoming 120 by 120. And we don't want that. But then again, this is just to explain to you what this does. And then again, you can also change this by a particular factor. Okay, coming back to the original thing, we're scaling by size and we're scaling to 375 by 812. All right, so this much is happening. And yeah, now we're back to that problem where how do we get rid of these guys? Well, these guys are appearing because this layer is the third layer in our entire layer panel. That means this icon and this icon are above it. Well, you could just say, hey, I'll just move this below, right? And then these guys will not show up. But if you do that, then you won't even see the icon here, right? So you don't want to move it here. You just want to keep it as it is. but you want these guys to disappear as it expands. So you can do this reordering. ProtoPie gives you that response on the fly as part of a trigger. So I'm going to say reorder, and I want to reorder this background to the top, right? So how do we do that? When you choose the reorder response, you get 4 different options. The first one is bring forward. What that does is it just moves this particular layer that I selected, which is IoT background, which is the white box layer that we have. It moves it forward by 1 layer, but we have 2 layers in front of it. So how do we fix that? There is also the bring to front, which is going to bring it to the absolute top of the entire layer stack. In converse, there is also the send backwards command, which is going to move it back by 1 layer. And the extreme version of that is send to back. It's going to make it the lowest layer in the entire layer stack. We don't want to do that right now. All we want to do is just bring it to the front. So let's test this again. I'm just going to press the tab here. And now I see that the white box is kind of covering both of these icons as well. So I think we're pretty much good to go here. Now, well, we also want a new page to appear to, or actually before that. So we're designing at the iPhone 11 Pro artboard, which means a device like this already has curved edges. What you might want to also do, because not all devices will have that, you might also want to change the radius of this box when it expands. So right now you'll notice that this box has this kind of a curved radius. Let me just zoom in here so you know, right? And as it expands, not all devices will have a curved kind of edge. So we want the edge to, this curvature to kind of go away. How do we do that? Well, again, when we tap, we want to kind of get rid of this border radius. How do we do that? So here you'll notice that there is a radius kind of response. Don't confuse it with border, that does something else, but we want to just change the radius. So we want to change the radius to what? Well, whatever value it was, you can see the existing value. ProtoPie shows it to you right now. The existing value is 10. We want to make it just 0 to make it an absolute perfect square. So let's test this one again. Now it's expanding. The border radius is kind of changing to 0. The icons are no longer visible. It's moving into the center. All of that is happening. And I will again break it down for you and show you each individual command, what it does. So let's say if there was no scaling, I'm just going to turn it off for a second just by pressing this toggle button here. I'm going to turn off the move as well. And let's just see what does reorder and what does the radius command just do in isolation. So if I were to press tab now, you see that the order is changing. It's coming in front of the icon and the radius is becoming a square. So this is just to show you individually what these commands are doing. All right, I'm going to turn these back on. And now we want the actual thing to happen. We've made the animation. Now we want, when we press this button or press this icon, we want to go to the onboarding page. So how do we do that? Well, we press jump. This is the response we want when we want to go from one page to another. Now you might remember I told you that ProtoPie already offers a bunch of different transitions, and I'll just talk to you about that in a second. But first we'll have to decide which scene to jump to. So we know we want to go from home to onboarding. So let's select that scene. We go from home to onboarding. All right. And like I said, ProtoPie is already offering you transitions. And again, I'll cover that, but let's just see what we've done so far, right? What happens when we actually press and the transition is just happening, right? It's just instantly jumping. We don't want that. We want to make the box first expand. You want to see that transition, and then the new page should come up. So how do we do that? Right now, this is happening because the moment the jump is set to happen immediately. If you look at the timeline here, you can kind of play with this guy here and kind of uncover more of the timeline as per your preference. So feel free to play with the UI a little bit. Don't be afraid, nothing's going to break. But yeah, if you see the timeline here, you'll notice that scaling is happening at 0, and then moving is happening at 0, and then the reordering is also happening at 0, and the radius is also starting at 0. But the jump, the new page, is also showing up at 0. We want it to show up after all of these animations happen. So we're going to give it a little bit of a delay. We're going to say, hey, if all of these guys are taking 0.2 seconds to complete, we're going to give it a 0.2 second delay. And now let's see what that does for us. So that's perfect. That's exactly how we wanted it. We wanted the box to expand, and then we wanted the new page to show up. Okay, but then what about ProtoPie's existing transitions? So let's talk about that really quickly. ProtoPie is offering these inbuilt transitions to you, which is fade, pop, slide in, slide out, and flip. Now you can go ahead and play with these, and I'll show you some of them. So if I were to do, let's say, a pop, what happens? This transition itself is doing another pop on top of the transition that we made. And this is not something that we want, but you know that ProtoPie offers this. So if you want to use that later on, you can. Then there's also the slide in. And that gives you a second option. Where is it sliding in from? Is it sliding in from the right to the left? Or is it sliding in from the left to the right? Or is it sliding in from the bottom to the top or the top to the bottom? So just to show you, I'm just going to say slide in from right to left. So what does that do? So this means when I press this button, the box expands and then ProtoPie does its own transition to kind of slide in from right to the left. One more thing that we can look at here is probably the fade transition. And let's see how that impacts it, the kind of effect. There you go. So the effect is a little more subtle and it just fades in. So far we have kind of covered the first part of the demo, which is you can make your own custom transition, make it a little bit fancy, and then you can also use ProtoPie's existing transitions to make it even better. So yeah, this is how you would do that. And I'm just going to look to the chat for a few questions right now. Okay, so Malika Singh is asking, so the pop is happening to the onboarding screen and not IoT background. That's absolutely correct. When you choose a jump transition and you've chosen a page, you've chosen this page or this scene, as ProtoPie calls it, onboarding, the transition happens to that scene. So let's say if I were to turn all of these off and just use ProtoPie's only effect here, let's just turn everything off and let's just try to use the jump transition directly. What happens? So if I were to choose, let's say, pop, it's coming in from the center. You see that the pop effect is actually being applied to the onboarding scene and it's coming in from the center. Now that might work for some prototypes or some demos and some scenarios, but for our case right now, we want the effect to be that the icon expands, the box of the icon expands, and that shows you what the actual app has inside it. So that's why we're choosing this kind of custom effect instead of using the existing one that we have in ProtoPie. So I'm going to go ahead and choose fade again just for our case, and I'm going to re-enable all of these. And I'm going to look at the questions again. Is there a way to choose a transition duration time? Nope. If you see here, there is just a delay option. You can't choose how long it takes, but you can choose when to make it happen. So there is no duration here. I'm just going on and re-enabling all the different effects that I turned off. So I've just turned them all on. All right. So if there's any more questions, I am just looking at the chat again. Okay. Malika is asking, why is it shown as a dot in the timeline? Well, it's shown as a dot because it's, like I said, you can't really control the duration of this effect. And what is happening is at this exact instant, the new page is just showing up. So there is no, it's not like a regular effect like scale or move where you can actually control the timeline position of it. But what's happening here is you just instantly jump to the new page with a pre-built effect. I hope that answers the question. Yeah. All right. Thank you. But yeah, any more questions? Please feel free to go ahead. And if not, I can go to the next part of the prototype as well. And I hope everything is working in order. If you think that I'm being a little fast or being a little slow, please let me know. I'll try to compensate in the next demos. Just waiting for the chat to kind of show up. Is it possible to create a personalized transition? So do you mean a personalized transition here? That is kind of what we tried to do here, by the way. We made our own custom effect. So even if I, let's say, didn't use this effect at all, let's say I don't have any transition effect, you can choose your own effect and you can play with the different objects, change the opacity, change the scaling and move, just like we did right now, and make this kind of custom personalized according to your app effect here. Paolo is asking, I don't understand why we use the radius transition. So a quick way to explain that is okay, let me show you again. So I'm just going to change it to fade and then radius. All right. So why did we use radius? Well, we used radius because not all devices. So for iPhones, we know that if you're running it on an iPhone 11 Pro, and in this case, you are because that's the artboard you've chosen. But let's say you were running it on another device that does not, like, let's say you were running it on an iPhone 6, I guess, for example, that device has very hard corner edges. So in that case, if you did not change the radius, what would happen is, let me show you. So I'm just going to turn this effect off for a second and turn this off for a second as well. And I will show you the difference between what happens when I don't have the radius and when I do have the radius. So when I do have the radius going to 0, it's becoming a hard edge. As the box expands, let's say you're running it on an iPhone 6, it will actually cover the exact precise edge of that screen. If you don't do this, if you turn this off, it's 4 o'clock. If you turn this off, and when the box expands, it will continue to have those rounded edges. So you will continue to see that on the screen on a device like an iPhone 6. Since we're only talking about an iPhone 11 Pro right now, that doesn't matter because the screen is already curved, right? Let me give you one more example. So let's assume this guy was, let's say the radius was 100, for example, which makes it a complete circle, right? So if we were to do this, now let's say you scale it. So now I'm going to show you the effect of radius on an iPhone 11. So if I expand now, you'll notice that the radius is still set to 100. You can see the things behind it. We don't want that. And that's why we changed the radius to 0 to make sure the absolute perfect edge of the screen is always covered. So I hope that answers that. There's one more question, and I think after this question, we'll just move on to the next part of the workshop. Is it possible to briefly explain the scale by size and factor? Yes. So let's just do that really quickly. And just to fix this, I will change the background radius to 10 again. Okay, scaling by size and scaling by factor. So when you scale by size, you're actually giving it an absolute size in terms of pixels. You're saying, make this 375 by 812. If you know the exact dimensions, that's great. That's exactly what you want. If you scale by factor, you're using the actual object. So if this object is 60 by 60, that's the 100% scaling of that object. So if I were to do scale to 100, that would lead to no change. Okay, so it's just moving because that thing is still on. But if I were to change it to 200%, it's going to take the object's actual size, which is 60 by 60, and then make it a 200% of that. So what is 200% of 60? It's going to be 120. It's just a double of that value. So it's becoming double the size. If I were to change it to say 300, that will make it 3 times that size. So this is useful in some effects where you want to, you just want to increase the size of a button by just make it double the size. So that's where you want to use the factor. But here for our case, we want to cover the full screen. That's why we're going with 375 by 812, which is the iPhone 11 artboard size. All right, I think we are good to go. Let's go to the next part of the workshop, which is demo 2. the onboarding page. So great, now we have, when you click on the icon, the onboarding page shows up, and this is what the onboarding page looks like. Here, what we want to do is we want to make this guy scrollable. So how do we do that? Right now, nothing's happening. And you can see if you scale out here, zoom out here, you'll see that there are these 3 different video clips that we want to show up. All right, so how do we do that? To do that, to make anything scrollable in ProtoPie, you must use a container. A container is just another way of saying it's a group, but it's got some extra capabilities. So if it's just a group of objects, right? Like if you think of this dots group here, it's also a container, but it has some extra properties thanks to ProtoPie. So what we want to do is we'll start off by creating a new container. You can press N, or you can go here and choose a container, and that creates a container right here at the top of the screen. You want this container to kind of contain these different objects. So how do we do that? So first, I'm just gonna choose this container. I'm gonna make it big enough so that it fits these different objects. I'm just gonna make it like this big. And I'll explain to you why this big, or why not some small amount, or why exactly this size. But just bear with me for a second and I will explain it to you. But let's say, yeah, we make a container and we want to put all these 3 different objects that we want to make scrollable. We want to put all of these objects inside this container. So you can just go ahead, take these 3 video layers or whatever objects. So here we want to just take these 3 video layers. You can just shift and press all 3, or select them here and just drag them inside container 1, which is our container layer. Now what's happened is, imagine that container to be like an invisible box that can allow scrolling to happen. So I will also teach you a different method of making containers, by the way. It might get a little complex, but we'll get there. So for now, you have this invisible box with this kind of blue border when you select it. By the way, if you want to see all containers, you can go here, press view, and say you want to see container borders. That way you will always see at that invisible border that a container is. All right, so we want to make this scrollable. So how do we do that? Well, here in the properties pane, you can see that there are these 3 options for scroll paging. I know for sure that I want to make it scrollable. So I can choose from none, which is where it's at currently. It's just a regular group, or I can choose scroll. So let's see what that does. So it's scrolling, but it's scrolling up and down. We don't want that. We want the horizontal scrolling to happen. So why is that happening? So the moment I changed scroll paging to scroll, the default direction is vertical. We want to change this to horizontal. We want to change the left and right arrows. And over scroll is, so what happens when you get to the end of the list? Does it bounce, or does it do nothing at all? So for right now, we don't want to mess with these values. We'll just keep it to bounce. And what does this do? I'll tell you about that later as well. So anyways, we chose scroll. We're at horizontal scrolling. The default values, I haven't touched them. Now let's see what this does. So it's scrolling. That's a huge win. Well, that's great. But we also want for it to not just scroll, we want it to kind of snap. We want it to snap like at this position. We also want the third one to snap at this position. So how do we do that? You choose the third option, which is paging. Now, what does that do? Here you can scroll like this. So this seems very close to the effect that we want. It's kind of given you that different page transition, and it's been so easy. We haven't even added any trigger or responses. This is just an inherent property of what a container can do. You don't even have to do anything special here. So just by doing that, we've gotten this. Now we notice a couple of things here. The first thing is there's no separation here. You'll notice that there's a separation here and here, and there's a separation here and here, but why is there nothing at the last element? So what ProtoPie is doing is, based on the container size, it's automatically calculating, okay, so there are these 3 objects inside it. Okay, so if there are 3 objects inside it, this is how much I need to scroll every single time to make the paging effect happen. So it's calculating on its own. But what is happening is, the first object is getting this extra white space here. The second object is getting it as well. But the third one, if you just look at the third container, it's just stopping right here. There's nothing to kind of give it that extra space. So what you can do is, you can add an empty spacer box. All you want to do is you just want to create a rectangle by pressing the R button on your keyboard, or just go to the shape menu and press a rectangle and you get a rectangle. We want exactly this amount of space here. Now there are multiple ways of doing this, so I'm just telling you one way of doing this. So you can create an empty rectangle. You want to make it the same width as this little guy, extra space. This is exactly the extra space you want. So let's see, we want it right after the third one. So we're going to move it to that position. So first I just dragged it inside the container, so it's still part of that container box. And now we're going to move it to the absolute edge, because that's where we want ProtoPie to calculate it from. Now ProtoPie is going to think, okay, there are these objects, and the total width of all these objects also includes this extra rectangle. So now you'll get that extra space when you're scrolling. So let's see what that does. As you can see, ProtoPie has automatically calculated, and it has tried to fit in an extra box here. What would happen if I just put like a random big box here? So if I just put like this, well, ProtoPie is going to try and calculate to fit that as well. And it will not work because it's much bigger. So it's just giving you a different kind of experience altogether. All we really want is just this extra bit. So we're going to leave it just at that much. I'm just going to press undo. There you go. So now you know that paging is working. Well, you think it's a little, just a second here. Yeah, there you go. Now you don't want to show this box, so we're just going to select this box here, and we are going to make the opacity 0 because we don't want that to be seen. It's just an empty spacer box. So now this is kind of done. I mean, we've achieved the different kind of scrolling here. Now let me tell you about one more thing. So this container is, like I said, a group of all these different objects inside of it. So what would happen if I started scaling it? What if I wanted to make it a bit bigger or smaller? I'm going to tell you two things. First of all, how does it affect the objects inside it? And second of all, how does that affect the actual scrolling experience? So first, if you look at the different objects inside it, they will all have these different constraints. What that means is when you expand the group, you're saying, oh, the width should be fixed, the height should be fixed, it should be sticking to the top, and it should be sticking to the left. This is the default value, and it's going to be there for all three objects inside. What happens if I change it? What if I say, hey, don't fix the width? And what does that mean? What does that do for us? And what if I say, instead of sticking to the top, stick to the bottom? So let's try doing that. So now what that means is, now when I try to kind of change the size of the container, the width is increasing, but the height is staying the same, because we changed the fixed width option, and we changed the sticky part to the bottom instead of pinning it to the top. So now when I expand the container like this, it's sticking to the bottom edge. Similarly, if I were to do the same thing for all these objects, I'm just going to select these objects one by one, and if I changed it to fixed width, but I said, instead of being sticky to the bottom, stick it to, let's say, the top, what would happen then? And let's say this time I don't want the height to be fixed. So what would that do? So now the height is changing, but the width is fixed. As I increase the container, nothing is happening to the width, and it's sticky to the top. And similarly, if I were to just select these objects and say, hey, fix height and width, but keep it stuck to the top and the left edge. So what does that do? That means when I scroll the container, the width is going to be static, the height is going to be static, and they're going to stick to the top and to the left. So even if you increase the size of the container, these objects really don't get affected. Okay, now let me tell you what happens to scrolling and why did I choose this box size to make the scrolling transition. Right, this is going to give you this kind of scrolling where you can scroll the full kind of extent. Like even if I'm right here on the right edge of the screen, I can kind of scroll. But let's say I said, hey, no, I want to make this box, let's say, only this big. So what does that do? That tells ProtoPie that this container is only swipeable in this particular area. So if I were to try to interact with this group outside here, it will not detect any touches. It will just not work because ProtoPie thinks that the container is only till here. So if I try scrolling here, it works. But if I try scrolling here, nope, nothing. So let's see what effect that has on scrolling. So if I do scroll, let's say, now you'll notice that the pages are behaving a bit weird and they're just stopping at this weird kind of interval. Why is it stopping like that? So what's happening is the width of the container is basically going to be the width of each page. You selected paging here, which means each kind of the entire width of objects inside of the container is going to be divided by the single width, and the single width is only this much. I think I'm being a little complicated here, but I'll try to explain maybe in a little bit simpler manner as well. In simpler terms, I think what's happening here is this container box is being treated as the width for one single page. So that means all objects inside it will move by that same width every single time. So here our width is the same width, which is 375 as the width of the iPhone screen. So each page, according to ProtoPie now, is going to be 375 because that's how big the container is. However, if I changed it to say 100, now ProtoPie thinks each page is going to be 100 only. So it's going to move at an interval of 100 pixels every time. That's all. It's just moving 100 pixels. Each ProtoPie thinks each page is only 100 pixels. It does not know what is inside the container. It just knows that all the objects inside, whatever width they are, they just need to be moved by 100. We don't want to do that. We just want to keep it the full width. So we want to choose 375. So now ProtoPie again does not know how many objects or what all is inside. They just know that, okay, this is the total width of all the objects inside. So we just want to move all of them by 375 at once. That's all we want to do. So Malika is asking, how did you put the videos inside the container? Well, I'll just do that once again. So let's say I don't have a container. Let's say I just have these videos. I will go here to the container menu at the top. I'll make a new container, and or I can press N for a new container. I'll drag it here to where the videos are, and then just expand it so that it fits the full screen. And then once I have that, I'll select these video layers one by one. I can command or control and select all of them, or I can shift select all of them, or you can just go ahead and select from here. So it's up to you. Just need to select all these layers and this extra spacer that we made, and then just move them inside the container. There you go. I hope that answers the question. So would this be applicable smaller container for swipe right or left interactions? I'm not very sure what you mean by that. Do you mean that do you mean if I can just do, oh, I see what you mean. So if you're saying something like, I think, yeah, theoretically you could. Yes, like the Tinder effect. Yes, you could do that. But yes, absolutely. I think you can do that. But what actually would happen in Tinder probably is you get a new card every time, right? So when you swipe left, you get a new card after that. And then when you swipe right, you get a new card after that. Here, what would happen is if you just use the swipe left and right, you're just scrolling between one layer. So you're just kind of going back and forth on one layer. So yes, you kind of get the same visual effect, but it's not doing the same thing. I hope that answers the question. So I'll just explain it to you. So assume that this is a card on Tinder. So this is kind of just going to move left. Oh, I think I didn't. Oh, there you go. I didn't enable scrolling the second time I made a container. So I made a new container. I'm just going to go to paging, and I'm going to choose horizontal scroll. And there you go. So here, yeah. So what that would do is, yes, you have this, but you're just constantly going to scroll between the same layer. So it's not going to give you anything new. That's what I meant. Anyways, yeah. So any more questions about this? If not, I think we can move to the third demo. Seems good, I guess. I hope you guys are following along, and I hope I'm not being too fast or too slow. If we see 1.5 slides on the main screen, the container is one image only. I have lots of white part at the end. How to avoid it? If you see 1.5 slides on the main screen, so you're saying white part at the end. Alexandra, I'm not sure I quite understand here. What I'm getting is, are you seeing something like this? Say something like this. Is that what you're seeing? Like how, like maybe this and a little bit of an extra screen, probably something like this. Is that close to what you are talking about? So like if you look at this one. Okay. So you're saying the container is one image only. I have lots of white part at the end. Okay. Oh, okay. So let me try to replicate what Alexandra is kind of talking about here. So for a second, I'm just going to kind of hide this. And I think what you're saying is you have this box. I think it's going to be a little complex for me to explain right now. So we might want to move it to the next workshop or something like that. But let me just try to quickly replicate what you're saying. I think you're saying something like this, right? And then you want to have a container. So let's say I make a new container. And then I'm just going to put all of these inside this, and I will put paging. So you're saying, yeah, either you'll not get the extra white space at all or something like that. Is that the intention? Well, yeah, so okay, this is a bit complex, and I think it will take a little bit more time. I think we can have this in a separate session. Leah, is that okay? Can you just is that like will we be covering this in a future session?
Uh, no, we don't cover it in the next workshop, but I think if we have time, I can answer it at the end of this workshop.
All right, let's do that. Let's do that. So for right now, let's just kind of move forward. But if there's, yeah, I'm sorry, Alexandra, but let's try to cover it in this workshop if we can. Otherwise, we'll try to do it in the future sometime. But I understand what you're talking about, and I have dealt with this scenario many times. Anyways, so this is what we had, and so far so good. Now what we want to do is we want to go from here to the next page. So just like the last time, we're going to select this box, and we want this box to be the button that takes you to the next page. So you select this box, you add a trigger. We want, well, what do we want? We want to make it a tap thing because we want to tap the button. So there you go, we just tap it. And then what response do we want in return for that tap? We want to jump to a new scene, as you might remember from the previous interaction. Which scene do we want to jump to? We want to jump to the third one, which is IoT home. So we will select that one. And transition, well, we can just keep trying out and see which one we like the most, and we can go with that. Let's just see what happens with none. So with none, it instantly appears. It's a little jarring for me, so maybe I would just want to choose a fade for now. But please feel free to play with the different options here. According to your liking, you can kind of build something that you want based on your app, based on your preference. So right now we've just gone ahead with the fade transition, and what it does is it just helps you jump to the new page. There you go. Now I think that's kind of done. We're done with demo number 2. Now let's move on to the third one, which is going to be probably the most advanced out of the 3. And thank you so much for following along for so long. And I think this is going to be really cool as well. Okay, so now for this one, we're on the IoT homepage, and what do we want to do? We want this sidebar to appear when we swipe from the edge. So how would we do that? Well, it seems, let's just look at the different options. So we want to interact with the sidebar. So I'm just going to select the sidebar here, and we'll just look at the different triggers that ProtoPie gives us. So ProtoPie gives us a fling, a pull, and a drag. Now these options kind of seem like what I want to do. So let's start with fling. What does that do? Well, first off, we have the right setting here. We are saying sidebar, we are saying direction is from left to right. Seems like it's all perfect, right? But how will we interact with it? There seems to be no part of this object on the page. And if we can't swipe on the object, how would that work? So here's where one more really cool thing comes into play. You select the object and you don't have to make a part of it visible. Yes, you could use a container, but here's something even cooler and much easier and much quicker. All you want to do is select the sidebar and you say touch area. There's this option here called touch area, and you're seeing that it's just a 0 on all sides. So that means, what is this thing about? What is this whole new thing? So this means, well, you're already able to touch this layer for sure. You can interact with it, but no part of it is visible on the screen. So we want to make a certain part of it visible on the screen. We want at least this edge to be kind of visible, but we don't want to show the object. So we can just add a certain amount of value. Now for iPhones and probably iOS devices, the minimum touch guideline is you're supposed to use a minimum tap target of 44. Now, what did that do? This, if I just wrote 44 here, and I wanted only this part to kind of have the extra touchable area, it's kind of giving me a yellow border all across the thing. Okay, let me quickly explain what's going on here. So first thing is this yellow with a white box inside it, this is representing your actual object. And these are the 4 different edges of your actual object. So what you want is, what we wanted for our demo is, we wanted to only have a 44 swipeable area only on one side, not on all sides, because these sides are going to be off the screen anyways. So it's okay if you want to keep it like this, but just to be very particular, I would say I don't want it to be equal for all sides. So I will first make it a 0 for everything. And then I said I don't want it to be equal for all sides, and I just want one side, which is the right edge. So that's the way I want to enter the number, 44. Now hypothetically, if I wanted the top edge also or something like that, I would go to the corresponding edge here. Like if I go to the top and I write 44, that would only make this part available to me as well as a tappable area. So right now we don't want that. We're just going to change it to 0. And what this does is, it's not an actual visible area on the screen. You don't see it. It will never appear on the screen. What we have done is we've just given any object or this object a little bit of an extension area where you can actually interact with it, where you can actually touch it, but it doesn't have to show up on the screen. So this might also be useful for when you have very small icons, let's say 16 by 16 icons, and you want to give it like a fully tappable area, because 16 by 16 becomes very hard to tap with your finger. So you want to make it, let's say the tappable area should be 40 by 40. So you can increase the touch area by kind of increasing the number here. So we're using the same thing. We're saying we just want this extra area to be tappable. So what does this do? Now for fling, we know that now this area, this invisible area, should be tappable. And let's see how fling works. So just like the ProtoPie conceptual model, you're saying fling is a trigger and you say you want a response in return. So ProtoPie is going to check for a fling here within this yellow area that we had. Let's just select this box again. So ProtoPie is going to check for a fling anywhere on the surface, but because only the yellow area is going to be visible on the, or like kind of interactable on the screen, ProtoPie will check for that fling interaction only in this space. Now, what do we want in return? We want the sidebar to come on screen. So how do we do that? Well, we want to move it. So let's just move it. So it's cool how ProtoPie is basically like you're speaking your regular language, right? It's very easy to use like that. So let's say you want to now move the sidebar to a particular position on the screen. So how do we know where to move it? Well, we know that, what is the current position? Let's see, I'll just click here and I can see that the current position is minus 240. We want to move it to this corner, right? We want to take the entire box and move it here. And I know that this corner on the screen is 0. So let's see what happens. So when I do a quick fling here, whoop, it's gonna move this sidebar here. Oh, I see a question. Just a second. Can I change a trigger once I have selected one, or do I have to delete and start again? I can do it for response, but not for triggers. Yes, that's right. You can do it for response, but you cannot do it for a trigger. Even for responses, you would want to add a new response. You can't really change the move to a scale directly. And even for fling, like once you have decided on the fling, you will need to either add a new trigger and copy and paste the interactions. So you can copy and paste if you want to do things really quickly. That's something that ProtoPie does allow, but you can't just change interactions on the fly like that. Anyways, coming back. So yeah, so what does this do? We're saying if ProtoPie detects a fling in that little orange area, then move. That's the response. So just to demonstrate how this really works, ProtoPie is really just checking for a fling to occur on that little area, and it's doing a move as a response. Now, it might seem to you like you're dragging the object, but you're not really doing that. What you're doing is you're just swiping quickly and the object is moving as a response. So to demonstrate this in another way is if I change the duration to 5 seconds, and if I did the fling again, whoop, it's gonna take its own sweet time to show up. So you're getting an object to move as a result of the fling being detected. That's how fling works. Oh, what is a fling? A fling is a very quick swipe on that particular area. Okay. All right. So now that we have that sorted, now let's look at the other two models that we can use. So I'm just going to add one more trigger, and I will choose, this time I'm going to choose pull. So what does pull do? I want it to happen on the sidebar, yes. I want the direction to be from left to right, that's also correct. There is a distance thing that it's asking me for. I wonder what that is, and we'll talk about that really quickly. And let's see what these different things do. So first off, I will start by telling you pull is a very special command inside of ProtoPie. It is not a regular command where it's not a regular trigger that instantly gets a response in return. You have to plug in a response. No. So for pull, you don't have to plug in a response. Pull by default in itself helps you move the object. Now, how does that work? So we know that this object, let's just click on this object for a second. And we know that this object has a width of 240 pixels, which means for it to be fully on the screen, it needs to move by 240 pixels. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to give the pull command a distance of 240. So let's see what that does. Now we have that little invisible yellow area where we can pull. And you can see that it's moving. And you can see that I can also move it back. This is exactly the kind of interaction that we wanted. But why is pull working like that? So like I said, pull is a very special interaction that does not require a response to move the object. The moving happens as part of the trigger. However, you can add a response and say something like, if this pull is a success, then do something. So for example, if I wanted to, let's say as an example, if I wanted to kind of just reduce the opacity of this box. This is just an example. We don't really want to do this. I just want to show what a response does inside of pull. So let's say I change the opacity to 0 as a response. That means this pull trigger will be checked for, has the object moved 240 pixels? If yes, then change the opacity of this object to 0. That's what we did. Here we don't need to do that, so I'm just going to delete this response. But the thing you need to understand here is you don't need to program a separate move as part of full. It is coming in as part of this interaction by default, by this trigger by default. So let's see, how does pull even function? How is it even like able to follow my finger? So what's happening here is pull checks for two things. It checks for the speed of your swipe, and it also checks for the distance that you have moved. So if I'm swiping very slowly, oops. So if I'm swiping very slowly, but I only move like this much, the pull trigger is going to think that, oh, well, it's just an unintentional, it's an accidental pull, so it's just going to take it back to the origin. It's not going to do anything. However, if you move it by, let's say, more than half of the distance and then leave it, then the pull command is going to think, oh, this guy really wants to pull it on the screen, so I'll do the rest for you. It's going to complete the command for you. The second thing it checks is the speed. So if you're fast enough, even if you don't move like half the length, it's still going to do the thing. See, I didn't have to take it all the way across and it still worked because that's how fast I was. So pull to refresh. I believe, yes, you can use pull to refresh like this as well. You can program certain commands to make it happen like that. Yes, you can use pull to refresh in the same way. Anyways, now, oh, I'll also, I think one more thing I needed to do was I need to turn this off. So you can at any point of time have a bunch of different interactions here. You can turn this one off because we don't want any kind of conflict. We really want to check for the pull. So I'm just going to turn that off and just show you again that the fast swipe will work. Okay, now what is the third way? We saw one more command that kind of enabled us to do this. So I'm going to turn this one off right now and just work with the third one. Let's see here. So this guy can be turned off. I will add a trigger. I will say drag. That is seems to come to your mind more naturally, right? You want to drag the object onto the screen. So it seems like that's what you want to do. So let's see what drag does. First of all, drag doesn't move the object like pull. It works very similar to any other ProtoPie trigger. It needs a response in return. So you're going to add a response here. What do we want? Well, first of all, you'll notice that when you're dragging, only three responses are given to you: move, scale, and rotate. We know for sure we want to use the move one, so let's try doing that. And let's see what's happening here. When you choose move, you get all these different options. You're seeing up and down, you're seeing left and right, and you're seeing diagonal, which is like, I think, all the way across. Limit, what does that do? What does ratio do? We'll quickly talk about all of that. So let's see, first of all, if I don't change any value, what's happening here. Well, you can see now it's moving exactly how pull was moving, but I can kind of move it even anywhere. Like, this is not what I want to do. So first of all, I want to make it only a horizontal thing. So let's do that. Now let's see here. So now it's only a horizontal movement. Well, this is good. This is very similar to how pull worked. So we're seeing, oh, it can be moved anywhere on the screen, horizontal direction. It can go anywhere. Again, that's not what we want. So how do we fix that? And why does drag do this? And one more thing that you'll notice is as soon as I lift my finger up, the dragging stops the object right there. That it doesn't do that pull kind of thing where it moves to a specific position. So that means if I were to kind of swipe only like a little bit, and if I just stopped here, it would just stop here. Again, this is not something that we want to do with our thing, but this is what drag functions. Now, what does limit do? So limit, right now it's set to none, which means there is absolutely no limit to how far the object can be dragged. Well, it can be dragged all the way across the screen, like it can be dragged outside of the screen. I can just continue dragging it outside the screen and it'll work. However, if I choose limit to screen, what's going to happen is it will not go outside the screen. It's stuck within the edges of the screen. And one more thing as a consequence you'll notice here is because we set it to limit to screen, the moment you start dragging, ProtoPie is like, oh my God, this thing was off the screen. So just going to quickly move it on the screen as well. So that's why the limit to screen kind of really limits the object to the screen. And then the third option is custom limit, which is what you might want to do. You have to give it a minimum X value and a maximum X value. So minimum, we know that, well, what is the existing position of the object? It's minus 240. And we want it to come to this kind of corner. So we know the minimum and maximum values now. So if I were to plug in, let's say minus 240, And if I plugged in a maximum of 0, well, it's going to stop the object at 0 then. That much is going to happen for sure, right? That much is happening. But what's not happening is if I leave it halfway, it's just going to stop there. So to do this, we have to do a bit of conditional prototyping, which I don't think we'll cover as part of this workshop. We will be covering it part of an advanced workshop. Leah, correct me if I'm wrong here. But a quick way to summarize that is I would actually add a touch up command. Touch up checks for when you lift your finger up. So I'm saying when I lift my finger up from the sidebar, I want something to happen. I want it to move to a certain position. I want it to move to 0, for example. So what does this do? So let's say this, if I just do this, the moment I lift my finger up, no matter how much I've dragged, it will instantly move the object to that position that I've specified, which is 0. So right now I have my finger down, and the moment I lift it up, boom, it's going to take it to 0. Now we don't want that. We want it to be like very conditional. We want, okay, if you have moved up beyond a certain point, only that. And for that, you add what you can see here as a condition. Now, again, this is probably going to be covered as part of a more advanced workshop. So I would like not waste your time with this right now. But Leah, please correct me if I'm wrong here. If you want, I can talk about it a little bit more. And anyways, I will also quickly look at the questions. Can you explain follow over moving on pull? Okay, so yeah, so this is how drag works. Drag for our case, for this particular interaction, you know, you need to kind of combine it with a bunch of different triggers to make the entire effect come to life. That's why I think we're going to pause the drag part right here. I'm going to kind of turn it off. And I will also now just talk about the question, which is follow over moving. So, okay, let's talk about this option. Let's see what happens here. When I do with resistance, the object is going to move, but it's not going to move on a 1-to-1 ratio. Oh, I think it's still off. Turn it on by pressing this button here. Okay, so I think since we specified only this distance, I think Leah, do you want to talk about this a little bit? Can you help me here?
You mean the distance or the
The follow over pulling part.
Ah, so there's three options, right? Could
Yeah.
you show us?
Yep. So there's no, and there's with resistance, and there is yes.
So no means when you finger drag over 240 distance, and this layer will not follow your finger. However, if you choose the yes, that means it will follow your finger. Could you try the yes one? Yeah. So no matter where your finger is, the layer will always follow your finger. Could you go to the maybe more right side?
Oh, so hold on. You're saying even if I,
Keep
yeah,
dragging.
it'll keep continuing to follow my finger.
Yes.
So I think this is the distance that kind of gives you that number, right? Like up till this distance, it will kind of follow your finger 1-to-1.
Yeah.
And I think it's happening. And
Yeah.
with resistance, if I were to continue pulling it, like beyond 240 pixels, I think
Yeah.
it will keep happening. But as you can see, my finger is moving more, but the object is not moving that much.
Yeah. That's right.
So if I were to not specify any distance, if I were to have given it a 0, look at how this would have happened. Basically, the object is not supposed to move at all. So it will seem like it's going to move a little bit because I've given it a with resistance. Oh, so it's not going to move at all. So if I give it like, let's say a 10, yeah, so it's going to move 10, and then beyond that, it's just going to say, yeah, it's going to be very like, look at the resistance amount there. I've moved my finger all the way across to the screen on the other side, but the object is not moving. And then if I leave it, it'll go back to the original position. So I think this is helpful for example, if I had made it 240, but if you want to give it that kind of bouncy over scroll kind of effect, you could use this, and I'll tell you how. So if you do this, for sure you've covered 240, but let's say you can do this as well. And when you leave it, it'll be stuck to 240. So what's happening here is the illusion is getting broken because there's nothing behind that layer. Like you can see behind that layer completely, right? So you can see that it's an object on top. You don't want that. So just an example, hypothetically speaking here, if I kind of increased the width of this guy to, for example, let's say this much, I'm just arbitrarily increasing it. And now if I wanted to move it, so you will see that you'll get that kind of bouncy effect where you see the kind of sidebar has gone like an over scroll, and when you leave it, it'll stop at that 240 position that you specified in the pull command. So that's how you can probably try to use this one. Okay, so we have this much covered as well. Any questions about this? So far, so good. I think we're at the end of our today's workshop journey. Hello, please, I would love to hear from you guys. Thanks so much for guiding us through this. Oh, thank you. Pleasure's all mine. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Any questions at all? I would be very happy to take them. Please feel free to reach out to Leah, who's going to talk about, I think she's doing that customer learning thing. So she will be very happy to help you with more questions as well. And I will be as well. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you guys. Thank you guys. But before that, okay. Now I think as part of that, I think we are mostly done. So just gonna give you a quick recap. So today you've kind of learned about all these different things. And again, I might not have touched upon every single thing, but the intention is if you know how to do tap, yes, you can also do double tap. If you know how to do drag, you can also figure out pinch. If you know how to do pull, well, that was a special one. And then if you know how to do opacity or radius, you can also kind of mess with shadow and border. They're very similar in nature. So feel free to try that out. Feel free to play with the app. And what can you do based on what you learned today? So this is a really advanced example. Why don't you check this out? So just like today's page transition and sliding and pulling, these are all these really cool things that you can do. And the way that this person has, you can actually click here. I think Rebecca can help you with this link as well. But the way that they've programmed it is they've done a lot of interactions here. Oop. I think it's taking a second to load. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, there you go. Oh, oh no. So you'll see that they've used a bunch of different commands, and you can do all of that. Like I think, look at the way that they've used a different timeline, the way that these different effects are flowing. That's going to give your prototype a little bit more of an edge. And I would just like to say that this is something that ProtoPie really kind of enables with a lot of ease. Yes, and I think we are done with this. Congratulations for doing this. Pat yourself on the back. You did a great job. And I hope I also did something useful for you guys. And with that, I think that's it. I think the next workshop is going to happen on June 1st, same time. I think you can find a link to that as well. And yeah, Rebecca has also shared a survey. It will be really nice of you if you can fill that as well. And thank you again for participating in this workshop. I hope this was helpful.